Greetings, friends. My name is Jessa McLean, and I'm here to provide you with some blueprints of disruption. This weekly podcast is dedicated to amplifying the work of activists, examining power structures, and sharing the success stories from the grassroots. Through these discussions, we hope to provide folks with the tools and the inspiration they need to start to dismantle capitalism, decolonize our spaces, and bring about the political revolution that we know we need. The summer of 1933 was a tense one. Economically, it was in the throes of the Great Depression. People were struggling, but they were also organizing and agitating around labor rights and a social safety net. Others were also organizing, though, towards a fascist end. In the first half of this episode, John Clark and I will talk a little bit about the swastika clubs that sprung up in Toronto during this time, how they were emboldened by the rise of Hitler and the Nazis, as well as legitimized, even encouraged, by the establishment here in Canada. These clubs, furthering white supremacist ideology, attacking Jewish community members, were allowed to roam around the city until the community decided they had had enough. On August 16, 1933, after a series of escalating events, a riot broke out during a heavily attended baseball game at Christie Pitts, a park in the heart of the Jewish and Italian Catholic communities in Toronto. The game was between Harbour Playground, a predominantly Jewish team, and St. Peter's, who were mostly Catholics. The Nazis came, again, to taunt the Jewish players and use their swastika to intimidate. But it obviously did not work. The response of mostly the Jewish community, the Italian community, and in part organized labor sent a message that resonated for quite some time. Our second guest, Catherine Crockett, will talk about that impact and the fact that Nazis are planning on coming back to Christie Pitts in circumstances terribly familiar to those that existed back then. A nationalist anti-immigration rally in the park is planned for this Saturday, September 13th. But, as they did before, the community is organizing against it. We'll find out what that response is shaping up to look like and why it's so important folks take a stand right now. First, let's hear from John. Good morning, John. Welcome back to Blueprints. Can you introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Yes, certainly. I'm John Clark, and I was a long-time organiser with the Ontario Coalition Against Poverty, OCAP, and I'm presently active in an organisation called 230 Fight Back, which is fighting for housing in Toronto's downtown east, and I'm doing various other things.
Lots of various other things. We'll be sure to link folks to John's work in the show notes, and we've had 230 Fight Back on. They were fun guests to have. I love talking about tenant organizing. It gives me hope when I see folks rising up against landlords. But yeah, John, I did call you in here to talk about, what lessons we can draw perhaps from the riots that occurred in 1933 and make some comparisons to today.
I mean, in a situation where Hitler and Mussolini were in power and fascism was a major threat in across the world, there were significant fascist movements in many other countries, including here in Canada, and they became quite arrogant. They were fascist, they were anti-Semitic, and they targeted the Jewish community in Toronto. They were organising swastika clubs, as they called them, and there's no question that they had a base of support, a significant base of support. But what's also true is that the establishment, not just in Canada, but in a whole series of Western countries, were actually very sympathetic to the fascist movements at that time. Later, of course, they had a big falling out over profits and colonies, and they went to war and they became champions of democracy against fascism. But in fact, people like Winston Churchill and such like were great fans of Adolf Hitler. So there was a huge amount of high level support. And so the fascists engaged at Christie Pitts during a baseball game in a deliberate provocation, and there was a mobilization against them, spearheaded by the Jewish community that took them on. one of a series of such confrontations that happened internationally. 2 years later in Britain, the famous Cable Street situation occurred, where Oswald Mosley and his fascists were prevented from marching, despite the fact that the Home Office in Britain mobilised 20,000 police to try to enable a few hundred fascists to march through London's East End. So a period of turmoil and a period of challenging fascism. And today, in the context of rising far right sentiments and organisations, we've seen the so-called freedom convoy go to Ottawa, but there's a significant base for the far right. And so right there in Christie Pitts, a place where fascism was contested a lifetime ago, they're coming back. And so I think that those that are organising to try to stop them are performing a really vital service.
Absolutely. I want to go back to that arrogance, though, because it triggered something in me. Watching some of those, there's some silly documentaries online. I'll link folks to them just, for shits and giggles. But one of the things that seems obvious is the way the Toronto mayor at the time gave space to these swastika clubs.
Yes.
Not only that, didn't just tolerate them, legitimize them. Right, even after they led to so many confrontations, right, and there was violence and tension, and as a mayor, something that you're supposed to quell, he brought them in as a conference on equal level with members of the Jewish community to try to kind of talk them all down. Things like that add to the arrogance, right? They feed into legitimize that division that's occurring in the working class. And another one of the fun facts from about the Toronto mayor at the time and the police is that quite often police resources would be allocated to working class struggles within the city rather than try to quell these riots, including on the day, the Christie Pitts riot, where they were more worried about unemployed folks protesting and sent much of their police resources there. And I just thought it spoke to the idea that it was so, it played right into their hand to have folks fighting in the parks rather than organizing together as a working class, right? That was more fearful. That was something that the police force was to be used for, not... Because this didn't just happen on August 16th, right? It was like a summer of tension, right? There was all these dates. It really hit head on Orange Day parade time. And when it was clear labor was standing with the Jewish community to a degree, right, and the migrants, and it was growing, the tension, and then it culminated then on the 16th after, a scuffle on the 14th, and then they came back on the 15th and spray painted a swastika, and it was that use of that imagery over and over again, trying to intimidate the Jewish community, that just eventually folks had had enough. And that's what resulted in the riots that we were talking about. What kind of lessons can we draw from that? So, like, following the riots, they did ban the swastika, but it's not like Jewish people were treated any better. I think something you said before the recording, maybe you want to hit on it again, like the conditions that Jewish people in Toronto were facing helped feed into this.
There's no doubt that the context with regards to the Jewish community was significantly different. Not that I'm seeking in any way to downplay the issue of anti-Semitism in the present period, but it is true that in the 1930s you had levels of active discrimination against the Jewish community that were enormous. That was generally true of people from Ireland, Southern Europe, and Eastern Europe. But it was particularly true of the Jewish community. Were treated to outrageous levels of discrimination, were marginalised and impoverished to a huge degree. So there was a real active, violent prejudice that the swastika clubs were playing on at that particular time, and I think that's an important distinction that needs to be made clear.
And Hitler at this time is arresting tens of thousands of folks in Germany, right? He's starting to arrest his political opponents, but also massive moves to discriminate against Jewish people there. And it seems early to folks in history, right? 33, where we didn't know exactly what was going on to Jewish people, but Jewish community certainly did, right? And they had been marching against that as well on July 11th, so right before the Orange Day Parade. And the Orange Order kind of ruled the city at the time, right? Like the Anglo-Saxon kind of white supremacists was the establishment as well. But they marched to a cenotaph. And the uproar that was created around, allowing Jewish people to march on the cenotaph, and, the letters to the editor, and then the comments that you can kind of historically go back and look at, sound like they could have come from Facebook pages here and now, right? Where folks are so very protective over our military nationalism and the way that folks are viewing and treating migrants.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, we're seeing the same rise of a far right that's playing on xenophobic and racist prejudices, and the parallels are the same. And indeed, I think as well, an important point that you raise is the legitimization of the far right by the establishment that was occurring at that time. You talk of the mayor being very chummy with the swastika clubs and such like. I mean, today we see sections of the Conservative Party prepared to openly embrace the Freedom Convoy and people who are overtly fascist. We're seeing, in fact, a blurring of the lines of distinction between mainstream conservatism and the far right. I think that's occurring. I mean, I just read an article from Australia in the newspaper Red Flag, and they were talking there about demonstrations taking place organized by racists and fascists, and the degree to which the media, the mainstream corporate media, and the political establishment are presenting them as just people with valid concerns. So yes, the door is being opened by the establishment, and the other point, and it comes from Christie Pitts, of course, is that any serious attempt to stop the fascists, any working class mobilization that challenges the fascists, will not be dealing with an impartial establishment, and it certainly won't be dealing with an impartial police force. We're going to be dealing with a situation where uh, the far right will be largely tolerated, significantly supported and assisted, and any mobilization that we engage in is going to have to swim against the stream. I mean, it's true. Look at the resources that are going into trying to crush Palestine solidarity movements at the moment. I guarantee that this gaggle of racists that assemble at Christie Pitts, if they show up, and let's hope they don't, they're not going to be lines of cops waiting for them. There's not going to be mounted police. There's not going to be riot cops ready to go. They're going to put down the welcome mat for them, and that's the reality of dealing with the rise of the far right. We can't count on the establishment to take a disapproving position and help us out. We have to organize independently.
I asked you before we recorded, I read a comment that the swastika clubs tended to overplay their numbers. There was one report like by 40 times to give the impression that there was more of them. They acted as gangs, so obviously that worked to their advantage, right? To think that there was always backup around the corner, but it also was to play on the minds of the people, right? That there was a larger majority of people excited, of working class people excited about Hitler than there really was. I don't know. Is that significant now? Whether or not public sentiment as a whole was against Jewish people, because they did face widespread discrimination. So in today's age, like, the Nazis are gathering at Christie Pitts this time, not because of Jewish people or Italian people. Even if they were migrants, they're talking about migrants of color, right? Specifically, there's obviously a delineation that's been made, and they're the targets for everything, right? Housing, jobs, healthcare, right? They're the reason your Tim Hortons is cold. Like, literally everything right now you read is just blaming migrants, and that is to such an advantage to the establishment. So, like, what is the right response then now? Knowing some of the parallels, but then also the stark differences.
Well, I mean, I think in those days, I mean, the swastika clubs clearly had a base. They were supported in higher places, and they had a base in the general population. There was widespread anti-Semitic prejudice at that time, and they drew upon that. Whether their active numbers were exaggerated, that's quite possible, but they nonetheless were a significant social manifestation, and I think that has to be acknowledged. And that's true today. I mean, this gaggle that's going to assemble in Christie Pitts may look quite pathetic, but the fact is, they speak to deep-seated prejudices that exist, and prejudices that are being nurtured. I mean, I'm absolutely a believer in the notion that fascism is a dangerous and violent force that we have to prevent from organising and assembling, and we must deny them the public square as a matter of necessity. But having said that, the extremists, if you want to use that term, are actually growing out of a soil that is impeccably mainstream. For every fascist who draws overtly racist conclusions, there are 10,000 editorials being written in newspapers and 100,000 statements being made by quite mainstream politicians that provide the nurturing for precisely those kinds of ideas. So if we're going to build a movement to stop fascism, it has to be a much more broadly anti-racist movement that's prepared to challenge the places where the places that produce this fascist edge.
So, although protecting the town square is important, there's such larger platforms out there to tackle.
I believe so.
Preaching this same message on so many levels. Yeah, I get that. Yeah, again, back to that toleration and encouragement from the establishment. Other parallels that just kind of scream City of Toronto right now is the fact that once pressured to stop using the swastika and being so overt in their racism, right? Because then sides start to be taken in the war. And so they took those shirts off and they became like a gentrification club for the beaches. This was the neighborhood where they thrived the most. Obviously, they were in the pits, the pit gang, but they would patrol the beaches, right? Trying to keep the beaches clean. And I thought like this was like the birthplace of Toronto gentrification, was literally Nazis just trying to still meet as a club and patrol like gangs, but under the auspices they were doing something really good for the city. Yeah, there's a song where, the Nazis never really went away. We're still having to deal with them. So I know you're not organizing for Saturday. I don't know if you're going to be there. I'm going to go cover it. And a lot of the response it's been varied, and I love that. It'll be a rainbow of collectives there responding. Some folks are organizing a family picnic, because this is a park. The reason they're choosing the pits is because has largely been an immigrant park. I say that with love, right? It's always been kind of sandwiched between two neighborhoods that has been changing over time, but almost always for new Canadians, right? People who have recently arrived. And to take that target, I think they're targeting migrants and families. So the response is to say, yeah, absolutely, this park belongs to our community and their families. But then there's also kind of a more militant response. I think this is a very different response than obviously what we saw in 1933. We have plans, right? We know it's coming. This was a little more spontaneous, and so it's going to go down a little bit differently. But I thought there's some real beauty in that maybe we've gone places as a movement that we can respond in different ways.
I think that when it comes to how you confront a Nazi gathering, it's significantly a tactical question, and the notion of actually just simply reclaiming the park in numbers is valid. But I do think there's a place for confronting Nazis, and I don't think we can shy away from that. I think it has to be recognised that if they are allowed to assemble, what they're building, I mean, it goes back to the swastika clubs and the tactics they use. What they essentially try to do is to build a street army. I mean, that's always their objective, is to mobilize in enough numbers and to develop the confidence and the status where they can start organizing openly, and when they do, they become larger. And so it's essential to prevent them from reaching that critical mass, and so it has to be approached strategically. And various tactical options are on the table, but one way or another, it's essential to ensure that they do not achieve any organizational cohesion, because if they do, they'll be a violent and very dangerous and very hateful force.
You say street armies, obviously my blood starts to boil a little bit faster. But I thought immediately to the University of Toronto and the tolerance given there for, I don't know what they called themselves, but they were vigilante groups that were allowed by the city and the university to patrol the campus, looking kind of like military. They had, vests and certain insignias on to kind of give that impression. And they were clearly targeting pro-Palestinian activism. That was the danger they were responding to. And then also I think of ICE. Now we talk about Hitler, but south of us right now we're witnessing an unleashing of horror, right? We can give it all kinds of names. It looks like fascism. We have state militia of sort, ICE, kind of. They seem like street gangs, street armies. We don't really know who makes them up. They don't seem to be following the law. And there is a kind of base of support that's rooted in that same kind of deep-seated kind of prejudice that exists. But I do think you're seeing larger community groups rise up in response and physically confronting, armed state police. You see any parallels to folks here taking a stand now on any kind of kernels of that street vigilantism?
Right. Yeah, I mean, we're going to be dealing with that very same kind of thing, and to a degree we already are. We're dealing with, yes, fascist mobilizations and such like, but there's no question that the whole agenda that we see in the ICE raids in the United States, the same mechanism is beginning to play out here. I mean, Carney's whole approach to border security and anti-immigrant stuff is to go in exactly the same direction. So I don't think we're in. I don't think we can delude ourselves that immigration raids and such like are just not something that happens because Canada's too nice. It happens south of the border because they're an ugly crew down there. I think there's a real risk of exactly the same kind of thing happening here. And yes, when it comes to state forces and the far right, well, I mean, I think of comrades in Greece who confronted Golden Dawn, and essentially they were dealing with a situation where Golden Dawn was the night shift and the riot cops were the day shift. So, I mean, of the same movement, and that's also something that's part of the reality of what we're up against.
Have any predictions for the outcome on Saturday?
From what I can see, it's certainly resonating. I think it's going to be an impressive mobilization. The possibilities for the fascists losing their nerve are there. The possibilities for a level of confrontation are always there in a situation like that. But one way or another, I think the fact that there has been a high-profile mobilization and an attempt to rally communities to confront these ugly and nasty people is a really important gain. So I think there's already been a victory. There's already been a situation where these evil bastards couldn't just call their arrogant display of hatred and go ahead with it unchallenged. They are being challenged, and that's what's really vital. And the issue is to build that challenge and to make sure that challenge prevails, and that they just go back into the sewer and stay there.
I did feel that too, watching all kinds mobilize towards Saturday, and a special kind of joy seeing the posters go up around the city using the imagery of the baseball bats and the anti-fascist symbols. because we are in scary political times, tense political times. And a lot of people are exhausted and, maybe want to avoid confrontation, right? That's an easy kind of
Yeah.
thing to do. It's hitting different watching what we're seeing down south, and it's like we don't want to wait to that point, because you're right, like Carney's very first bill was a migration bill, right? It gave him sweeping powers to ministers to revoke visas in the same way you're watching Trump revoke visas and,
Yeah.
round up South Koreans working inside factories and all the other horrible stuff. So yeah, I feel like it's us responding not just to the Nazis who wanted to intimidate our immigrant community members in Toronto, but to all of it, right? And then obviously a week after that is draw the line.
Yeah. In fact, as you say that, I mean, I think that I think the whole point is that the rise of the far right is a kind of a symptom. You know, like if there's something wrong with the blood, you might get a pimple on your nose, and they're the pimple, and that I think is what we're dealing with. Is they grow out of conditions of social crisis, and they grow out of situations of despair, and they certainly grow out of passivity by working class movements. Right? If you have that kind of a situation, the growth of the far right is more or less inevitable. We need to build, therefore, movements that engage in a struggle, and not just against the Nazis, but against the conditions that are creating the Nazi presence. And we need to mobilize decisively. And if we do that and build a movement that's strong, that's powerful, that's challenging the whole vicious agenda of racism, austerity, militarization, attack on indigenous rights, the environmental degradation that's being pursued, all of these things that are underway now. If we've got a strong, powerful movement, then the fascists are going to be like an irrelevant force. They're going to just not have they're not going to have the social base that they're looking for. They'll just have to go home and look at their Nazi scrapbooks and give up.
Even the ruling elite will be insignificant, John.
And here, yeah, well, we've got that's a bit of a ways ahead, but I live for the day. But yes, I mean, I think that we've got to build the kind of fighting movement, and when we do that, the Nazis will be like a little annoying bug that you just squash. You can just, they'll be irrelevant. But if we remain passive in the face of this situation, they will grow and they will become a threat.
You just heard from John Clark, and when we called him into the studio, he made it clear, look, I'd love to talk about the history of Christie Pitts and the significance of now, but I can't take responsibility for doing the organizing. I am not involved. I can't speak for them, but he did say whoever was doing it was doing a vital service. And now we have one of the people who's doing those vital services in the studio with us today. Catherine, can you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. My name's Catherine Crockett. I'm involved with the General Defense Committee of the Industrial Workers of the World. I'm a Wobbly. I've helped organize a whole bunch of counter protests to hate rallies. We nearly always manage to shut them down. Normally, it's a matter of just showing up in greater numbers, and I'm feeling really optimistic about the numbers for Saturday. It's a beautiful thing when we outnumber them so much that they just kind of give up and leave, which has definitely happened in the past.
Or don't show up at all?
Sometimes, 2018, the first anniversary of the Unite the Right hate rally in Charlottesville, there was a vigil at Nathan Phillips Square, and the far right tried to show up, and they saw that the square was full of anti-fascists, and they turned around and left. Some of them literally ran. So
how satisfying.
Yeah. So having excellent numbers is my favorite tactic, because it's means everyone will have a less strenuous day than they might at least everyone on our side will have a less strenuous day, and we can network and hang out and do all that good community building stuff. And I'm rather expecting that's like going to be what happens on Saturday, because I don't think the person organizing the hate rally, Joe Anajar, had any idea what he was doing locating it at Christie Pitts. I don't think he knew.
Oh, really? It seems so deliberate to us. Oh, so symbolic, right?
Yeah, I know. I think what happened was last year it was at Nathan Phillips, December 2024. It was at Nathan Phillips Square, and his group did not manage to stay. We managed to shut them down just by tooting on the siren on a megaphone every time any of them tried to speak. And it's really hard to push through that, and no one could hear them anyway. So they left. And I rather suspect he was just picking a location that was further from downtown because he thought it might work better.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing at the idea he thought maybe they could fly a little bit under the radar more at Christie Pitts and just doesn't realize the shitstorm he stepped into.
Oh, yeah. I really think he just had no idea. And of course, there's just enormous, I've never seen grassroots pushback like this ever to a hate rally. People are constantly asking me, is something happening? And I'm like, yes, there is. We're countering them. You should come. All these neighborhood groups on Facebook in the whole region are like, this can't happen. This must not be allowed. And all sorts of community orgs are, working on going. And I think if they even bother showing up, they're going to show up to find that the park is full of community members who have no patience with this nonsense. And one of the beautiful things about the Christie Pitts riot is it stayed done for 92 years. This is the first time anyone has even tried this sort of crap since.
Let's talk a little bit about what this crap is, because, they're not labeling it as a hate rally. What are they telling people? What are they preying on and trying to get folks to come out and rally around?
They are saying that they're opposed to mass immigration. And while they're not actually letting on what they mean by that, they mean immigration by people of color. And when they've had small outings where they march around with flags on hockey sticks and such, like
Canadian flags
on hockey sticks, yeah, they tend to harass service workers who are people of color. They will tell any person of color they see to behave and to conform to Canadian values. And they generally seem to have a lot of fear, distrust, hatred towards people of color, and somehow think that they're less Canadian than white people. And they're on stolen ground. They should know better. But of course they don't. And they don't ever seem to get very many people. Like the Nathan Phillips Square thing last year, they got under 100, and every other action they've done, which I don't think they've been pre-announcing them, they get maybe 3 dozen, and they just like wander around and sing the national anthem very badly and let their flags drag on the ground and generally do a really incompetent job of being nationalistic.
Just the more you describe them, the more they end up sounding like the swastika clubs John and I, referenced in the first half of this. And just that the harassment too, the way, like, these would be the first fuckers to sign up for ICE here in Canada.
Yeah.
And one of John's opinions, I know you didn't get to hear it, but I'll tell you, was that part of the purpose for them was to try to build capacity, just like we do.
Yeah.
And literally build street armies.
They may be trying that, but I think what they're doing is turning people off.
Good.
They're just, I'm also following some of the online stuff because I'm trying to monitor their online presence, and they just, the more I see, the less competent they sound.
Did you say confident or competent?
Less competent. Like, I think they're
both.
I think Joe Anajar is confident, but there's no basis in reality for him to be confident. Sure, he got Tommy Robinson to signal boost the action, but Tommy Robinson is thousands of miles away in England. And also, for someone who's anti immigration, Tommy Robinson got kicked out of the country for lying to Canadian immigration.
He's holding his own rally in the UK on the same day. It's the significant date for them.
Apparently,
So obviously we can't have something like this go unchecked. So how did the response start to shape up for you?
someone showed me a Twitter post of Joanna Jars saying that they were going to do this at Christie Pitts, and I said, "No way in hell." And talked to some people in my union branch, and we called an action. And then later we found out other people had called actions, and we're like, "Awesome! We can all show up, and it will be great." And but like everybody I've spoken to, their reaction has been, "Christie Pitts, you've got to be kidding. They cannot possibly be allowed to do that." And I'm really, really thrilled with just the sheer unanimity of community response to this.
I think it's a mixture of the location choice, the
Hmm.
bad location choice, but also the timing, right, where folks are looking to take a stand.
Yeah,
And imagine all the people who didn't. I mean, that's 90 years ago, 90 plus years ago
yeah.
that happened. And so there's going to be people who didn't know. I mean, it's not exactly something Toronto advertises a whole lot. We don't market as a city. So I
Mhm.
love that there's probably a good chunk of, maybe generational, that
Mhm.
is learning the history of the Christie Pitts riot and are embracing it the way we did before we started recording,
Mhm.
how it was such a lovely thing to think back on.
Oh, it was great. It was quite possibly the first mass resistance to Nazism outside of Germany. And it really had some wonderful long term effects. Like, there had been ongoing struggles with segregation in Toronto parks. And before we had air conditioning, it was pretty much a matter of life and death to have access to parks, especially the lakeshore parks. And there had been a lot of racist nonsense about trying to exclude Italian and Jewish people from a lot of the parks. And there'd been other skirmishes, but after Christie Pitts, the city of Toronto made Nathan Phillips, the dude City Hall Square is named after, made him Parks Commissioner. I believe he was the first Jewish Parks Commissioner. I believe he later became mayor. And they worked on improving park access and making it more equitable, which was, a really awesome thing. I lived about 4 blocks south of there in 1988, and there was a really nasty heat wave and drought summer of '88, and I would see entire families coming out at night in their like jammies carrying cots, and they would sleep in like Garrison Creek Park, Bickford Park, etc., just to because if you have a top floor apartment with a west exposure, it's not going to cool down. So people needed parks access then just to avoid getting heat prostration. And I've heard like just oral history of wonderful stories of cooperation. Like, he's a Jewish dude called Isidore Rosenthal. He later had an electronics distribution company, and was my grand boss. But he was jogging towards Christie Pitts, and some dudes driving a truck pulled over and said, "Hey, are you going to Christie Pitts? You want a lift?" And it was some Italian Torontonian guys who were taking a truckload of axe handles over. So he got a lift over. They probably gave him an axe handle, but it's like everybody who had grandparents in Toronto at the time has a story about it. And I heard a speaker at one of the commemorative barbecues we did talk about that and say that some people would be like, "Oh yeah, Zadie, sure you were there. Everybody says they were there," but they probably were. Apparently, the numbers were such that chances are nearly all of the Jewish men and youth between 15 and 35 went to Christie Pitts that night. Like nearly all of them.
And then some.
Yeah, yeah, and it worked. It worked. We haven't had any problems with hate rallies at Christie Pitts in the 92 years since. The parks, there was a lot of reform in how the parks were run and how they were made accessible. It was really successful, and no one actually died.
Even with all the bats and axe handles.
Like, I don't really care about what happened to the Nazis. It was pretty vigorous, but yeah. And there's so much. There's been a ton of stuff written about it. There are some books. There's a lot of stuff in the Toronto Public Library. There have been at least two graphic novels. The Beguiling, which is a few blocks southeast of Christie Pitts. It's on College, near Augusta. Um, Actually, it's half a block south of Joe Shuster's house. Joe Shuster who is one of the two people who invented Superman. He lived like half a block north of the Beguiling, before he moved to the U.S. But yeah, yeah, they have graphic novels. There's all kinds of cool stuff. I'm I'm going to be rocking my Christie Pitts Hardball League T-shirt on Saturday. It's a riff on the Three Arrows of the Iron Front, which is one of the oldest anti-fascist groups.
May we use it on our cover art?
Oh, awesome. We may still have a few shirts to sell, but if anyone's interested, they're also available on Bonfire, online shirt vending site.
If I find you, I'm going to try to buy one from you. I will be there Saturday.
Okay, awesome.
Now, let's talk about that for a second. That's actually a talking point. Not everyone likes that, right? Some people will. I see Charlie Angus retweeting it. He's embracing it.
Yeah.
I will reserve comment on Charlie Angus for this episode. But that's going to rub some people the wrong way, right? Maybe not our audience. Maybe they will. A lot of folks have a real heavy emphasis on nonviolence. And, three baseball bats. Antifa already has a rep, right? So we add the baseball bat reference and we glorify riots, violent riots, necessary. Whose side I'm on here, but let's talk to the folks that are like, they're sitting a little uncomfortable. They want to defend migrants, right? They definitely do not like this shit in their neighborhood or any neighborhood. But they don't know how to approach Antifa.
Oh, okay. The only time I've ever seen things get rough is when the numbers are even. That is wildly unlikely on Saturday. On Saturday, chances are we will outnumber them so massively they may even just give up and not even try. But the other likely possibility is that the far right will wind up inside a pig pen, which is what we call it when they're surrounded by several rows of cops. And they will spend some time in the pig pen, find out it's not very much fun because people are either yelling at them or ignoring them.
They get kettled, but like in a wholly different way.
Yeah, yeah, they sort of choose to be kettled. Like, the cops will help them leave, but that's about it. If people, yeah, anyone who's concerned about violence, the thing that is most likely to prevent violence is making sure a counter protest has excellent turnout. Because the more people, if we get enough numbers, any tactic works, and nobody really actually wants to get hurt. So if we get anytime we got great numbers, we would hang out, eat snacks, network, make sure any nearby unhoused people got snacks too, because like we're in their space. And it would, maybe sing songs. It would be a pleasant experience. I think, but the more people show up, the better, because I want this to have a deterrent effect too. Like, part of the thing with the far right is they assume most people agree with them. Like, I know for sure Joe Anajar thinks that most Canadians agree with him. And if he winds up showing up with like 24 goofs and we show up with like hundreds or thousands of community members who are saying, no, we don't like you, we don't approve of you, you're wrong, go away. That will actually, help take the wind out of their sails. It did take him a while before he started doing anything again after that thing in Nathan Phillips
I mean,
Square.
as an organizer, can you not understand that?
Oh, well, yeah, yeah, but
You might want to lay low for a while after
yeah,
that.
but I've
That's
never
kind of
failed
embarrassing.
that hard.
No, maybe we don't know how. I mean, I have thrown some rallies where like just you and a friend show up, so I will. I bet I wasn't to counter a
Yeah,
force,
that's the thing.
But
Like sometimes you go, okay, well, we've got the numbers to do an information picket, so let's go with that. Hand out some leaflets. Part of the thing is too, like sometimes it's funny. The Nathan Phillips Square thing, it was the same day as the Santa Claus parade. And some people leaving after the parade and walked across Nathan Phillips Square, and one of their group was like all excited about Canada First. And I don't think the people she was with knew she would support that sort of thing, and they were embarrassed and not happy with her. And the kids who were with them were embarrassed and not happy. At one point, she heard me refer to the group as white supremacists, and she decided she was big mad at me personally, and she started yelling at me. And this was a very petite woman in an elf costume. And she was literally hopping mad, just jumping up and down and stamping her feet and waving her arms and berating me.
oh,
And I'm just like, I could only laugh. It was just so ridiculous. And the people she was with kept trying to get her to disengage. And I wasn't really helping because I didn't think, it was too funny for me to really want to like cut things short.
that's too tempting.
Yeah, getting berated by a white supremacist in an elf costume was not on my bingo card.
The things you get to see when you push back.
Yeah, yeah.
What do you hope to get other than deterring the far right from showing up on Saturday, or getting them to leave, or pig pens, and even warning them from trying this again, particularly that group?
Well, every time they fail, they wind up squabbling with each other, which really saps their capacity. So that will be nice. The other thing I want to see is lots and lots of networking and community organizing, because a lot of people who don't necessarily usually come out will be there. And I hope they get talking to each other and talking to organizers. And, you know, many good things will come from this, including fairly unrelated stuff. Like all of us do all sorts of community work. I do some support for a safe injection site and a food serve, and I do a bit of encampment support. And all of those are things where we could use a lot more volunteers, always.
Sign up sheets. You're all going to have your sign up sheets.
Yeah, exactly. And I am sure I am not the only person in this who is thinking of this as an opportunity to go, well, you're obviously really interested in community defense. We have so many things that you could do. Tell me what would be a good, let's talk and we can find you a good fit. Because there really is a ton of stuff that needs doing. And pretty much anybody who has any spare time whatsoever could probably be a huge help.
That comment you made about numbers earlier, deterring folks at the park and being enough, and to prevent violence. It's also the solution, to bloodless revolution and a defense against, people often ask, besides the elbows up, what are you going to do then to defend yourself against annexation or all these other external threats they're worried about? Mm-hmm. And the answer is a united working class, right? Like numbers. Yep. Mm-hmm. Not just on Saturday.
Yeah, there's that famous thing that allegedly if you get 3% of the population out in the streets, anything works. And I've never seen that many people come out, but I'd love to see it.
We'll get there.
No, but yeah, having a mass response is huge, and it works. And like there was a famous women's strike in Iceland, and they went from women being very unequal in their rights there to things improving dramatically and having a female head of government and so forth pretty rapidly. And it was just like all the women were like, okay, we're on strike today. We're not doing anything. We're just going to go out and outside and talk to each other. And that worked. And there's so many things where, solidarity is what it takes to get things done.
Absolutely. And if there's ever a need for folks to, band together to find this kind of common ground, we can always find differences, but surely fighting Nazis is one common ground. And then next Saturday, right? Is it next Saturday? The 20th. On September 20th, folks are again uniting under many, many banners to draw the line. And that's kind of like a pushback against anti-immigration rhetoric, austerity measures, militarism, imperialism, and genocide, and all of that. And so it's growing, it's building, and Christie Pitts could possibly be just another one of those spark points that help build into that.
That would be beautiful.
Yes. I'm so glad that folks like you are doing the work so that it's, going to be an impressive turnout with purpose. We didn't kind of get into the details, but all the links will be in the show notes, folks, for you to RSVP, find it, and find out more about it. But there's a community rally that's planned, that's timed for when Canada First, was planning to be there. But then, presumably when dust settles or they scamper with the tail between their legs, there will then be a massive reclaiming of the park, continues with like a family-oriented day with all kinds of people that have signed up for activities to, entertain children and other kind of community activities. And I love that it's kind of this menagerie of a response, because that truly is what community is, right?
I think it's going to be a wonderful day, and I hope that the Canada First decides to not bother showing up, so I get to concentrate on attending the event and enjoying all the stuff they've got planned. And I think that's actually not pretty likely, but I'm really looking forward to being part of, either making sure they don't show up or fending them off if they do. And I'm also I'm really happy about all the people who are organizing response, and also the Orange Hats and the Movement Defense Committee, who are awesome and who keep us safe. The Orange Hats are legal observers, and what they do is keep an eye on the police. And the Movement Defense Committee helps anyone who gets arrested. And I'm not expecting anyone on our side to get arrested, but, there's going to be a lot of cops around, so who the heck knows? Hopefully the police will behave themselves. I know that I believe the mayor and the local city councillor have kind of commented, criticized Canada First. They have positive about the action,
Yeah, they've asked the hate crimes police, they're utilizing those same tools used against us, and asking them to keep an eye on it. We shall see.
Yeah,
we shall see. But I would love to touch base afterwards as well.
I'd be delighted to. Yeah,
see how we all feel about how it went down. But yeah, the best of luck on Saturday. You won't need it, though. The community will be with you. I'm having feels about this. I grew up in Toronto. I don't think I was totally familiar with that history, and I obviously did a deep dive going into this week. And so I am also in awe of what happened and riled up for Saturday, and extremely hopeful, especially after talking to both you and John.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. I'm looking forward to meeting you too. Talk to you after our glorious victory, and may it stay done for another 92 years.
That is a wrap on another episode of Blueprints of Disruption. Thank you for joining us. Blueprints of Disruption is an independent production operated cooperatively. You can follow us on Twitter at BP of Disruption. If you'd like to help us continue disrupting the status quo, please share our content, and if you have the means, consider becoming a patron. Not only does our support come from the progressive community, so does our content. So reach out to us and let us know what or who we should be amplifying. So until next time, keep disrupting.